Today, we're going to tie to the concepts that we've learned about energy and matter together, specifically about how they interact through living systems. We've already talked a lot about how energy moves through living systems. However, we haven't talked so much about matter. So we're going to talk about each of these today. And the terms we use is that energy flows and matter cycles. And you're going to see what I mean by flows and cycles in just a minute. So let's talk about energy, and we use the same diagram we used before. We're going to say that energy flows in one direction from the sun as light energy, through living systems as chemical energy or glucose, and then out into space as heat energy. It's easy to remember that energy will take these three forms as it moves through living systems: light, chemical, and heat. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So we recall that all the energy that comes into Earth enters as light energy from the sun. And if we go back to our pyramid here, all that light energy goes straight to the base, straight to our producers, our plants, because they're the ones that are using that sunlight energy and storing it in glucose through photosynthesis. So our plants are making all that sugar, and that's the stored chemical energy that's then going to travel up to our consumers, up to our primary consumers who are going to take that energy from the producers, and then they're going to store some of it, about 10% of it. That stored energy from our primary consumers will get passed on to a secondary, and then they'll use some, store some chemical energy, pass it up to our tertiary. And then if we recall, at every step of this pyramid, every step of the food chain, we're losing that energy as heat energy. So it's used up in our metabolism, and it gets converted to heat. And heat is unusable by any sort of organism. So there's no organism that can stand next to a warm spot and get a full stomach. It's not a usable form of energy for living organisms. So that heat energy just radiates out, and it actually leaves the Earth in the form of heat out into outer space. So if you look at this diagram kind of zoomed out here, you can see that energy flow. It comes in as light, travels up our food chain as glucose or sugar, stored chemical energy, and then leaves as heat energy as those organisms use it up and transform it into heat. That's your energy flow. It comes in and out. And what's important is once that heat energy leaves, it kind of just floats around in space forever. It just kind of disperses out. So it comes in, goes through, and leaves. That's a little different than matter. So all the molecules and atoms that make up the soil, the air, and the water, and eventually make up living organisms, instead of flowing, these cycle through living systems. So they get reused over and over and over again. So let's take a look at what that looks like. And I'm going to use the same diagram here, but this time I'm going to trace matter, and I'm going to use the color blue to do that. So we have what we call the nutrient pool. It's all these atoms and molecules that organisms need to survive. Maybe it's the carbon that makes up their body, the hydrogen that makes up the water, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, all those molecules or atoms that make up living things. We're just calling them nutrients right now. So all those nutrients that maybe exist in the soil or the air or the water, those nutrients are all going to get sucked up by our producers, some through the leaves, some through the roots. And we've already talked about how they take in carbon dioxide from the air and water from the ground, but they're also taking in nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen from the soil. All of that is going to make up what we call the biomass of the plant. So literally the living matter, the stuff that makes up this living organism. This organism is pulling nutrients and atoms out of the ground and reassembling them to make it part of their body. If you think about all these plants, what's going to happen to those plants? They're going to get eaten. So our primary consumers are going to go ahead and eat the producers. Maybe it's a little rabbit eating some grass, and they're literally going to take those nutrients and take those molecules from the producers. So when a rabbit eats the grass, it's not just for the energy. They're taking the matter that made up that grass and making it part of them. They're taking those atoms and rearranging them to make their own muscles and their own bones and their own proteins. And then those primary consumers are going to be made of that biomass that they ate. Something is going to eat them, which they're going to use to grow and repair their cells. So our secondary consumers are going to take those nutrients from our primary consumers And this matter is going to travel up the food chain. This biomass is going to travel up the food chain all the way up to our tertiary consumers, and even higher if there's more organisms. Now, just like energy, the matter that makes up living organisms is going to leave them. And if you think about yourself, there's actually only really two ways that matter leaves your body, or this biomass leaves your body. And those two ways are waste and decay. So waste is just when you get rid of things that you don't need. So either it's going to the bathroom, or it's getting a haircut, or it's clipping your nails. Stuff is leaving your body that you don't need. And the other way is decay. So decay is when we die and we get decomposed, broken back down into our components, and then get recycled back into new organisms. So if a tree falls in the woods, maybe some mushrooms or something are breaking down that matter back into nutrients. And this is done by a special group of organisms called decomposers. So you can think about these as organisms like I mentioned, fungus, mushrooms, or bacteria, organisms that break down dead living things. And they break down that matter back into the nutrients, which goes back into the soil, the air, and the water, that nutrient pool, to get reused again. So it's kind of weird, but you can think about a living organism that maybe lived hundreds of years ago that was made up of matter. Well, some sort of fungus or bacteria, when that organism died, broke it down and it turned into a new organism. You could technically be made of the same atoms that a dinosaur or George Washington was made of, because that matter just gets recycled over and over and over again. So when we look at this diagram here, we can look at the energy. We can see the energy flowing up through our living systems and out, but the matter in blue is getting recycled over and over and over again through our living systems. And the last point of this is just that the two kind of interact with each other. So the energy flowing is what allows the matter to cycle through an ecosystem. When we talk about the energy in the matter, there's a short period of time as it travels through living systems where it's kind of intertwined. Remember, our energy is stored in glucose, and glucose is made of atoms. It's made of matter. So without that energy moving through, the matter doesn't also cycle through. And you can kind of see it here as that matter travels up through the food chain. That's what's kind of pushing the energy along and out. So the two are very well intertwined. The movement of matter follows the movement of energy as things eat each other. It all goes back to this basic food chains, those basic food pyramids. And I like to think of it as kind of like a water wheel, right? The water here kind of represents the energy that's flowing through. If you think about the water that's making this wheel spin, the water's coming in, traveling through the wheel, and then out the other side. What's important is that water is never used again. It goes and flows down the river, and never goes through this wheel again, because it's powered by the flow of the river. So it just goes in and out, much like our energy comes in as light and then leaves as heat. We don't see that energy ever again. We have to get that new energy from the sun. And then this is your matter here that's getting cycled around and around and around and around between your organisms. That's the wheel that's spinning, because that energy is flowing through it. If you stop this energy here, this matter stops moving around. We always say if the sun were to go out, well, all life on Earth would be over, because there's no source of energy to power that cycling of matter.